little bit here. All right. I think we're ready. You ready?
I'm ready, dear. Good morning.
Good morning. We haven't done a live for a few weeks. We've been traveling and looking for inspiration in our own lives, in our own world. What's inspired you lately?
Well, I was surfing on the internet and I found a letter that Michael J. Fox wrote to himself. It was something that Oprah's magazine had encouraged. So I want to treat it to people.
Okay. So she asked 16 celebrities to write a letter to their younger self, which I thought was pretty brilliant. I've asked people to write letters to their older selves. So, about what they wish they had done. And so it's kind of interesting to flip it around.
This is more about what he learned.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is Michael J. Fox writing to himself. He says, "Dear Michael, when the time comes to chase your dreams, and it will, they may seem elusive, but no, you won't catch them all at once, just one challenge at a time. When success comes, and it will, don't gobble it up. Savor and share it, and it will last. When love comes, and it will, don't bury it in expectation and projection. Be prepared to fall in love all over again every day. When the unexpected and inconceivable intrudes on life, and it will, deal with life's actual events. Don't obsess about perceived eventualities. Relax, enjoy the ride." I love that.
Yeah, I think especially that last little line, relax and enjoy the ride. I think sometimes we do get a little bit too serious.
Yeah.
But we do want to be conscious. We do want to be aware of how we're moving through our space, how we're moving through time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've always emphasized that.
Trying to stay present is a challenge because I think we do live in a human experience where we're projecting ahead, we're looking behind, we're trying to assess all the time how what our past has given us is going to affect our future.
And I think he was saying also to be careful about expectations. You have to, you might have or hope to be famous, but you can't live with that possibility. It just has to happen more generically. And when it says that you're going to fall in love over and over again every day, I know that's true, but is that with me?
Yeah, it is. You too.
Yeah, me too.
Speaking of me too.
Yeah. Ooh. Well,
that's a nice
segue. Subliminal message there. But I think it's really talking about how we move through life, and if you have set expectations, then you can be disappointed. And who would want to be disappointed? Life is good almost no matter what your circumstances are, and I think that's what he was saying in that last line. We obviously know he's been challenged with some pretty severe medical problems, and just dwelling on the eventual outcome of those problems is not healthy.
Right.
You have to move through those days and enjoy each one, and let that be a reminder that it will come. So let's make sure that we're using our healthiest days the best as possible.
Yes. So I would ask everybody watching and that listens to our videos and our podcasts to check in periodically and ask, what's my inspiration? What kind of things inspire me? And also, how am I inspiring others? It's, we often don't know. And I love when people tell me that I've inspired them and that something I've said or done has helped them in some way. That kind of gives me a little bit more fuel to know that I'm on the right track.
Well, you certainly are a key person in having people kind of check in with their sexuality.
Yeah.
Which I tease a little bit, but it's very important.
Yeah.
Especially in a relationship.
Well, it's not important if you're getting enough and it's great quality, right? It's just great. You enjoy it. But those aren't usually the people that contact me. They're usually a little frustrated with how things are going or not going for them.
So being conscious, but not spreading yourself so thin that you feel like you need to tackle everything all at the same time.
Right.
Just be a little bit more organic and let it grow and let it happen.
Who was it? Who was it that asked to make a list of the top 25 things or 30 things?
Well, I don't know where that originated, but recently it came up as in one of Warren Buffett's stockholder letters that that you make a list of the many things that you would like to do, and then realize that the top 4 or 5 are the ones that you should pursue, and the remainder of the things on the list are going to become your biggest distraction.
Right.
So that's why it's important not to have too many girlfriends.
Yeah, that gets
Just
confusing.
Keep the list to 4 or 5.
Okay, 4 or 5.
Right. Otherwise,
Okay.
you're spreading yourself too thin. You're spreading yourself
Any
too
guy
thin.
that can handle 4 or 5 girlfriends at once, I think he's highly medicated every day with Viagra, or he's just he's the king of the world.
No, I just thought you were talking about inspiration. I think it depends on how much inspiration he's getting from each of his partners.
There's a lot of guys out there trying to be Hugh Hefner right now. I see it online. They're so jealous of that guy, and I'm not sure that he was all that happy all the time, because he was a little tired. He was exhausted most of the time.
Well, definitely. I think we try not to live with envy, but maybe there's a little bit out there for you.
Probably, yeah.
He was able to get away with things that other men would probably not be able to get away with. He would, instead of just kind of having the perception, he was just put it all the way out there so that nobody would challenge his willingness to be bold and put it out there.
Well, and I think that men that are trying to emulate Hugh Hefner also are doing it in a very different world than what he was doing it in. Well, and the Me Too movement definitely has an impact on how men can treat lots of women and how that's going to work for them.
Well, and I think if you only want to live one portion of Hugh Hefner's life, then that would be misleading, because he did a lot of other things that were very proactive for women, and I think he had a genuine fondness for women that
I think so.
that helped many of them move through their lives.
Right. But I would bet that he touched a lot of women without asking.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know.
I think that now we're going to get controversial because you don't want to be guessing.
No, people told me that have been around him. So,
okay.
but that was the times too, and I think that's what we have to understand. So the other inspirational person we want to talk about, speaking of Me Too, is Tarana Burke, who was the first person to come out with the hashtag Me Too like 12 or 14 years ago now, and
very, very patient with
yes.
the evolution of that concept, and it kind of exemplifies the exponential scale, where nothing seems to be happening with the movement until all of a sudden it explodes, and that's what happens with an exponential equation. And
right.
Just in case you were wondering about exponential equations.
I was wondering about that. I was dreaming about that. Last
but
night.
she had to realize that she had made the statement, but then not necessarily. Even she didn't know how it was going to evolve and then eventually have such an impact on our society. It's very hard to move the society needle.
Right.
And big credits for her for getting that started.
Right.
Sometimes we move forward quicker if we can piggyback on something that somebody else has done. And I think that's what ultimately happened, is that she started it and then other people move the needle, help move it along.
So what do you think her main mission was with starting it? What was she hoping for?
Well, I think she wanted to raise awareness that what had occurred, I assume, to her was not an isolated event, and that these experiences were occurring frequently, and that there was confusion about whether or not this was okay or not okay, and whether they were invited or just accepted. and she was pointing out to a large group of people that they weren't invited and they weren't accepted. They were just tolerated. And I think that was her primary message, was to all people, was that, hey, we're just tolerating this. And how do you feel about it? And pretty soon, a lot of people, supported what she was saying. I'm just tolerating it.
Well, and I think a lot of people were not tolerating it and had no voice. And for me, that's the thing that she's done the most, and the women that have followed her in 2017 to bring it out in the public the way they did, was to give women a voice. And because when, sadly, when an oppressed group speaks out, when one individual speaks out about something that's ugly, not kind or not fun, oftentimes they're not believed, and it's just kind of brushed under the rug. Whereas now, when we have this momentum of women supporting women and men who have had these occurrences, that didn't have anybody that they could talk to about it, had no processing of it, and had nobody that would even believe them. So that, to me, that's what's happened. It's the sad side of it for me is the punishments that are occurring so far retroactively. I think that, obviously people like Harvey Weinstein had a long pattern of misbehavior and abuse of women. That definitely needed to be handled. But I think when we're pulling out things that happened on an isolated occasion 30 years ago, that to me is, we really need to look at the broader picture. Because when we do that and we pick on the people that aren't doing that anymore, that learned from that mistake or whatever, we're challenging people to not believe the current ones. So I think we have to be really careful, because we want to make sure that anybody coming forward now is treated with respect and believed, and at least supported in that mission.
Well, I think there's a whole spectrum of what is tolerated and not tolerated, and I think that her first goal was to point out that even annoying things that wouldn't necessarily fit a legal definition of assault are still not okay, and that we can start by working on the easy ones first. And a lot of people just weren't aware that these things weren't okay and weren't invited. Like you say, the culture changed from 30 years ago. So it isn't always, I think when someone finally has to go report something, the system has failed. Now we're picking up the pieces, and it's still very awkward to work your way through those situations. But hopefully they're happening less and less, because people are understanding that this was a total misunderstanding before. What was thought was okay was not, was just being tolerated and not invited.
I was under the misconception that in the adult sexy lifestyle, that includes people who are swingers and people who are not, but just adults that want to live a sexy lifestyle, from where I teach a lot of my courses, that group would have a great understanding of consent and honoring people's yeses and nos and boundaries. And I've been sadly, kind of made awakened to the fact that no, it's still a huge problem. It's a cultural problem, and it goes across all lines. So we have to be aware of, that just because people are in a circumstance, like if you're at a nudist resort, just because people are there naked doesn't mean that you can touch them, or that you don't get to do what you want with them without their enthusiastic consent.
And even if you're on at an event that is lifestyle friendly, where you might start assuming that people are are definitely more sexually oriented, that they would invite those types of approaches.
Right.
And that's
Right.
that's not. You have to be careful anytime you're starting to assume
Right.
you know what another person is interested in doing and what they're.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the message: is don't assume, ask.
What's the word assume? When you break it down, it's the ass out of you and me.
Yeah, someone came up with that a long time ago.
That's
So
kind of good.
yeah, and
So don't make an ass out of you and me.
and I think that we've had a few sessions on how to do the ask and how to make the asks more sexy, more friendly, more inviting. And I think the power of an ask is incredible. It doesn't have to be just for sex. An invitation, again, very wise person said, what's the best thing you can give a person? And it's an invitation. I will never forget that.
Right.
And I've actually used that unknowingly in the past. When I was accepted to medical school, I needed a roommate, and I sent an invitation off. I just said, hey, I need somebody to help me pay rent that's in medical school. We can, kind of help each other get through. And I sent an invitation. He was totally shocked. He thought he was going to have to work his way in and try to figure something out. And shazam, he got an easy invite to share space that I had already rented. It was very, very nice. So invitations are definitely, just think of them as a sexy ask.
Yes. Here's a comment that just came through. We're talking about the consent and how important it is, and especially in any lifestyle, but in a lifestyle where things can really go haywire quickly. And she said, unfortunately, she just experienced this in her workplace, and it was awful. She said, just because we are sexual educators does not mean that we're here to have to subject ourselves to no consent. And I've asked this before. People assume because I'm a sex doctor that I want to have sex with my patients or sex with anybody, and that I'm sexually free to them, and that I'm going to talk about my sexuality. I had a woman just slam me for not sharing my sexual personal beliefs and experiences with her because she asked. And I said, first of all, it's none of your business. My sex is my personal space. That's my sacred part of my life, which is not open to public scrutiny. And she just really, went into name calling and trying to degrade me because I wouldn't do that.
So boundaries.
So then she tried to coerce me. See, then the bullying comes up. So if somebody says no to you and you keep going, now you're bullying and coercing. And that's exactly what she did. And this was a woman. So
yeah, well, certainly if bullying would imply not just a second ask, but an anger.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people are going to misunderstand. You have to understand that conversations are complicated, and if you ask something and it isn't received, you just to me all the time, ask me something and I don't get it, and then you have to ask a different way. I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, but if you were to get mad, or I were to get mad with my response, anger definitely is a straightforward no, go away. I think we need to not be as tolerant with inappropriate anger.
Yeah. And I think that's why when we're sharing these things, either publicly or personally in our friendships, when we share our experiences and how it made us feel, that gives it some humanity. It's not just blow it off. I can't tell you how many people, I had sexual abuse as a child, and I can't tell you how many people throughout my life have tried to say, just blow it off. It's in the past. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. And
Right.
and that's so not validating of whatever my experience was. It's not for anybody else to fix or change, but at least acknowledge.
Well, I think that's where this movement though feels like it's sometimes getting sidetracked. Nobody should be trying to talk you out of your experience.
Right.
But I think what happens is that when many people start sharing the idea that they have had uh, sexual, something assault, especially as a child, and it's affected them, and then you see how many of them that's been. It's a chance for you to say to yourself, I guess I better be a little bit more careful about how I'm behaving and what I'm doing, and how I feel about it. It may not be relevant to you, so you don't catch on, but if it is relevant, then something's been prevented.
Right.
Right. I think the Me Too movement is really more of a preventive movement, and it wasn't really designed to be as aggressively. I guess the word addictive was coming up. I was trying to figure out something else, but there are those terrible cases that come to light, and those are the most dramatic. So those are going to come up in the media for sure. But I think if you overhear someone saying, "Hey, quit doing that. That's annoying me," and then you ask yourself, "Man, I've been kind of doing the same thing. Maybe I better think about that." Then it starts to spread through society in a preventive way. We have to diminish the number of times this occurs.
Well, and one of the things that I teach in my class on consent and making consent sexy is about the hug, and how often people just inadvertently go up and grab and hug people. And a woman just in the last class that I taught was saying, "But my hugs are magic. My hugs are great. People love my hugs." And I had to ask her, well, how do you know? How do you know if you've never asked someone if they're okay with you hugging them, and you just go up and hug them? That may not, in your mind, that may not be an assault, but for somebody who has a lot of history of abuse, that kind of unprepared for touch can be a huge trigger, and you can't know that going in. So I said, you're assuming a lot about what people want from you, and they may not want your hug. You have to ask. Once you ask, if they say yes, now you have two people that want to hug each other. It's a win-win, and it really does create a whole different dynamic when you stop, before you go up and go, "I want a hug," as you're wrapping your body around them, to pause and say, "I would love to hug you," or are you comfortable with, or would you like one too? So that then you've got two people saying yes. That's the best, right?
Right.
It's just the best.
Well, now we're talking about consent more than the Me Too.
But that's a lot of people don't realize that they're assaulting people without their consent when they think they're doing something innocent, like a hug or a slap on the butt. Right. Or a grab of a boob.
Well, I think consent as a topic, though, is, and as I read the Me Too movement, I think that's where there's a little angst. No, we want people to be able to share their experiences without necessarily having it become a big event. Something for people to ponder, something for people to be aware of. When you start talking about consent and somebody messing up with consent, then that does become oftentimes aggressive. I mean, that I don't know. That's
or corrective. I mean, if people, because I've had this a lot where people say, "Well, I'm a hugger. I never ask because I'm a hugger," and you have to understand that when you're doing that, you're doing it for your own needs, and you are not taking into consideration somebody else's needs at all. And that's a really hard step for people to make, even with something like a hug. So then now you take that into the sex world, and people have an even harder time because they assume if they want sex with somebody, that somebody wants sex back with them.
So, well, again, to try to explain my perspective or what I'm trying to show, I mean, I agree with those things. I agree with that. But say you're in a room with 20 people and someone says, "Gosh, I'm just curious, how many people in this room like to be hugged?" And people raise their hands or they don't raise their hands. And all the other people in the room go, wow, I'm surprised it's not everyone raising their hand.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should be a little careful about who I hug.
Mm-hmm.
That's preventive. When you walk up and you give somebody a hug and they say, hey, I don't like to be hugged, that's consent. That's now corrective.
Right.
And that's traumatic.
For whom?
Well, for the person that did the hug, yeah.
But the person that did the hug doesn't realize they've been traumatizing people all the time.
Well, they would if they were in the room and people raised their hands, and then they had that
Right.
that meaning. They suddenly realized that,
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't have to have had. Then they wouldn't have hugged that person, and then they wouldn't have had to been corrected.
So that brings us to a great point, because that's why teaching this consent has to happen as a toddler. We have to start teaching it as soon as children can walk and talk and interact with us, is to grant them, to get them in the habit of being asked and asking. Instead of it's part of the socialization that we need to have. You watch children just take food off the other people's plates in a room. That's an animal behavior. It's like, no, we got to socialize you. You need to ask first. You don't just go take something from somebody else without asking.
Right.
And that seems like an early stage lesson, but we don't impart that empowerment of a child's body on themselves. We tell children all the time that their body isn't their own. So it has to start young, so that when we're 40, we don't get in trouble. We don't get arrested for grabbing people because we didn't ask. The fact that we still have to teach this to grown-ass adults it becomes a little tiresome, especially for people that have had consistent assault over their life, which is most women. Most women have dealt with some kind of assault most days of their lives. So if we just acknowledge that, okay, that's the reality, then we have to step it back and go, okay, how can we prevent this? And that is helping people become aware. But at this point in time, if somebody came up and grabbed me without asking, I'm going to educate them.
Right.
Because I'm not going to tolerate it anymore, because we have now permission to not tolerate it anymore. And I'm going to educate them. I'm not going to punch them. I'm not going to arrest them, but I am going to educate them, because that's my role. We have to do that. And women and men have to step up for themselves so that it doesn't become a bigger problem. Right?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's true.
And it might embarrass him, but okay.
Oh, it will embarrass.
Good. Well, whatever it takes, because obviously he didn't get the message from the Me Too movement, everybody else talking about it. It's like that person didn't see that they were part of the problem. How can you help a person see that they're a part of the problem if they won't acknowledge it in a global way?
Well, I think it's nice to talk about teaching our children and from when they grow up, but we're trying to change the behavior of a lot of adults, and they didn't grow up that way. So I think preventive is always better. If it isn't working, sure. And people who continue to mess up are going to eventually, find that correction is the only way that they can get their feedback. But we learn things every day just from watching what other people are doing and what other people want.
Right.
So.
Okay, I'm gonna be a little devil's advocate here, or Nancy advocate. So I taught a class on a boat with 1,000 people on making consent sexy. How many people showed up for that class?
Yeah, not very many.
Not very many. You know why? Because all those other people don't think they need it. Not because it's not interesting, because they don't think they need it, because they think they got this. And they're the ones out there assaulting people every day. We heard just in our little group, everybody had a story of some kind of sexual assault
Right.
on this trip that week. So those people were still not getting the message. And those people that were assaulted still didn't feel empowered to say something at the time. So now they've a missed opportunity to educate that person, because they're not going to come to classes. when they hear it on the news, they're sure as shit not thinking it applies to them.
Well, I think that, you know, when a person goes and is hired by a company, they have to go through a list of the rules and how to behave, what the culture is in that company. But when a person goes on a vacation, they're not asked to do that. And in those situations, in those situations, I mean, we've had that discussion. We think that that should be required, because I think you could just have a show of hands. Because I saw that the day that you ask how many women have, you know, are okay being touched without consent, and no one raised their hand.
No one, zero.
And then how many men are okay with being touched, and half of them raised their hand, but the other half didn't.
Right.
So then that brought awareness to the women.
Mm-hmm. But not all
that
men
want to be touched.
Right, right.
So that's preventive. Nobody was embarrassed. That was just new information revealed.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it seems like it's common sense to you, you're an educator. Mm-hmm. And not everyone is educated at the same time for all things that are moving through. I was on a trip recently, and I drove past a truck that was pulled over by a highway patrol, and my brother said, you know, if you don't move over into the left lane, you'll get a ticket. So now, when a truck is off the road, with the big trucks off the road or anything like that, you're required to move over into the left lane, or you're breaking the law.
I didn't know.
So now you've gotten that education.
Okay.
You didn't have to get a ticket.
Right. Okay.
So that's how this has to spread through, and I think that was the real inspiration for Ms. Burke and the Me Too movement. She really wanted to point out I think she believed, and she's quite strong. I mean, mm-hmm. when I hear about things, but so now she's become a little bit more aggressive that way. But I think originally it was just saying, hey, if enough people point out that this is not okay, maybe there'll be a shift.
Yeah.
And I think that's occurring. I think, you know, a lot of people are aware now that they have to be more careful, whether they choose to or not. I mean, you go to an event, a lifestyle event, and people are on vacation and they're motivated to have sex. It's gonna be the hot spot for consent, and right now that should be an example of consent, and it's not, which is disappointing. But now all these people listening will know that that's a concern, and they can kind of ask themselves, well, how am I doing when I'm at a lifestyle event?
Yeah, or asking children. I ask children now, you know, may I hug you, rather than just say, hug me, give me a hug. You know, mm-hmm. I ask, may I hug you? And so that at least they feel like somebody is giving them some kind of choice over their body and what they want to do with it, you know, when it's not an emergency or medical intervention. So I think these are important topics. So have a conversation with your family and friends as to the hugging thing and how often people hug or hugged when they don't want to be, and then what you can do, what kind of process you can do. I know somebody said that the hug thing, that they just turn to the side now when people come up to hug them. And I mean, and the kiss thing's another thing. I've had strangers come up and want to lay a kiss on my lips, and you're like trying to turn your cheek because he's like, no, I don't really want to kiss your lips. So we have just to be aware of people's boundaries and culturally and, you know, gender-wise. I mean, you'd probably be a little less comfortable with a man coming up and laying a lip lock on you than a woman, right?
I'm not comfortable with either.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you know, I turn my cheek,
yeah.
But I think that really what we're hoping for is the people who are listening are asking themselves, you know, what can they do to make sure they're not invading the space of someone else?
There you go. That's a great question.
Instead of having to learn how to police the world, I mean, which is necessary, but that's not what we want to happen. Preventive is always better.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So just remember, for your own self, just ask before you touch, period. I mean, it's kind of simple, right?
Well, and if it's in a lifestyle event, think of a way to make it feel a little bit more sexy.
More of an invitation.
You might find that the person you're talking with, if you feel like you've got a connection with them, or you're thinking that it's a strong possibility, the likelihood that it's occurring on their side is probably there, and they don't know how to break the ice. And if nobody breaks the ice, nothing's going to happen. And you don't want to break the ice by touching. You want to break the ice by saying, "Hey, I'm feeling this way," or you know, "How are you feeling?" Invite their consent,
Right.
and do the small talk first. And you might, but to not do that and to just touch, nowadays you might not get the answer you're hoping for.
Well, I hope people can just be honest. If you're just not in the mood for a hug, somebody doesn't, you don't feel like you have to be socially take one for the team with people that want to come into your space that you're not comfortable with. You have every right to say no, thank you. You don't need to smack them or be mean, but you can just say no, thanks. I'm good. And be okay with that. You don't owe anybody anything ever in those circumstances.
So which is worse, an uninvited kiss or grope?
Both. Yeah.
I'm glad you got answer C, both. All the above.
Yeah. It's like, just, we really want to reserve the right to have people touch us, hug us, kiss us, grope us, whom we want to have that happened with.
All right, we're about done.
We're not all takers. We're done.
All right. So inspiration, and then look at the Me Too movement and be inspired by what this woman has created.
Yeah.
And realize that the best way to help our community is to move in the direction of being preventive.
Mm-hmm.
Ask yourself, how am I behaving? And be an example, not a warning.
That's it.
All
right. And remember that every day you want to love harder, laugh more, and enthusiastically, consensually kiss longer. May I kiss you?
There you go,
dear. All right. Make this a great day. We only get this one once. It's not a dress rehearsal.
That's it.
Till next time.
Let life happen, relax, and enjoy.
All right. Yeah. Bye.
So I need